In the rugged mountains of northern Spain, in the year 1491, a child named Inigo Lopez de Loyola was born into a noble Basque family. The world he entered was one defined by honor, chivalry, and warfare. Europe at the time was filled with kingdoms competing for power, and young men of noble birth were often raised to become soldiers. Inigo grew up surrounded by the ideals of knighthood and courtly life. As a young man, he trained in swordsmanship, military discipline, and the customs of noble courts. This youthful ambition was not religious. Like many soldiers of his era, he dreamed of glory on the battlefield and recognitions for acts of bravery. By his 20s, Inigo was serving as a soldier for Spanish nobles. He carried himself with confidence, determination, shaped by the discipline and expectations of military life. That was until, in 1521, that his life changed forever. During one of his battles at a Spanish fortress in Papellonia, French forces attacked the fortress. The defenders were heavily outnumbered, and many believed surrender was the only option. But Inigo urged the soldiers to continue fighting, because for him, retreat meant dishonor. During the fury of the battle, a cannonball struck him directly, shattering one leg and severely injuring the other. The fortress soon fell. The young soldier who had dreamed of glory was carried away from the battlefield, his military career effectively over. He was taken back to his family home in Loyola to recover. The healing process was long and painful. Inspired by knights and heroic adventures, he soon searched for something to read. He asked for books of those nature, but none were available. Instead, all he was given were religious books about the life of Christ and the lives of saints. At first, he simply read them to pass the time. But as he continued reading, something unexpected happened. When he imagined returning to his former life of military glory, the excitement faded quickly. Yet, he imagined a life devoted to God and service. He experienced a deep and lasting peace. The realization slowly transformed his understanding of purpose and success. After recovering, Inigo made a decision that surprised many who knew him. He left behind his ambitions as a soldier and began pursuing a life of spiritual reflection. Soon he was healed enough to travel to the monastery of Montserrat. There is where he confessed his past sins and symbolically laid down his sword before the altar of Mary. This gesture represented the end of one life and the beginning of another. Soon after, he spent many months in the nearby town of Manresa. During his time in Manresa, Ignatius often withdrew into solitude to pray and reflect. One of the places he spent time was a small cave outside of town. There he prayed for hours, fasted, and wrestled with deep spiritual questions about his life and purpose. These months of reflection were intense and sometimes difficult, but they helped shape the spiritual insights that would later become the spiritual exercises. During that time, though, he experienced lots of pain and suffering. It even caused him greater distress in his later years. as the long periods of fasting caused issues with his stomach. But nevertheless, he continued, and he began writing down insights about prayer and self-examination. These writings also helped to form what would soon become the Spiritual Exercises, a guide that helps people reflect on their lives, understand their motivations, and grow spiritually. Inigo eventually realized that if he wanted to guide others, he needed an education. Though he was already in his 30s, he returned to school and studied along students much younger than himself. His studies eventually led him to the University of Paris. At the time, it was one of the great intellectual centers of Europe. While studying in Paris, Inigo met several companions who would become central to his mission. Among them were Peter Faber and Francis Xavier. Inigo shared with them spiritual insights he had developed through prayer and reflection. Over time, a small group of friends formed around a shared desire to dedicate their lives to the serving of God and helping of others. It was at that time that Inigo de Loyola likely changed his name to Ignatius. And in 1534, the group gathered in a small chapel in Montmartre in Paris. There, they made vows of poverty and service to God. They promised that if possible, they would travel to Jerusalem to serve Christians in the Holy Land. And if that journey was not possible, they pledged to place themselves at the service of the Pope, ready to go wherever the church needed them. Several years later, in 1537, Ignatius and some of his companions were ordained as priests. By this time, their community had grown stronger and more organized. In 1540, Pope Paul III officially approved their new religious order, the Jesuits, or the Society of Jesus. The Jesuits were very different from many other religious orders of the time. Rather than living permanently in monasteries, they traveled, taught, preached, and served wherever they were needed. Ignatius became the first superior general of the order and led it from Rome. Under his leadership, Jesuits established schools, advised rulers, and traveled across the world as missionaries. Within a few decades, members of the Society of Jesus had reached Asia, Africa, and the Americas. The once wounded soldier who had dreamed of battlefield glory had become the leader of a global religious movement dedicated to education, faith, and service. Ignatius soon died in Rome in 1556. The order had already grown to more than 1,000 members. Today, Jesuit institutions continue to educate millions of students around the world. The story of Ignatius of Loyola is one of transformation. A soldier who once pursued honor and glory on the battlefield ultimately dedicated his life to education, reflection, and service of God. His legacy reminds us that even the most unexpected moments can lead to new missions and a deeper purpose